So this Saturday, we're going to have CALABRESE join us. Carl is so knowledgeable. He's one of my favorite guests for sure. He's knowledgeable on every level, the federal level, the state level, the local level. He keeps in touch with all of these things. Carl happens to be in Texas right now visiting his new 9th grandchild, his grandson. So, Carl, how's Texas?
Texas is very warm, much warmer than we've had in Western New York, although I understand the next few days are going to get considerably warmer. That's a good thing.
Yeah, but it might be a day here and a day there.
Yeah, but everything is big in Texas, but it's wonderful. It doesn't matter what the weather here for me is, Ralph, because I got a beautiful grandson, 7.5 pounds, that I'm holding, and he's just great. So it's been a joyous time for the CALABRESE family.
This is your 9th grandchild?
Yes. Wow. I have 5 in Amherst, 3 in Cleveland, and now 1 in Texas.
So, look, I'm fortunate enough to have my 3 children here, so my 6 grandchildren are here. That's part of the problem that we deal with is so many of our kids and therefore our grandkids are out of state because New York pushes them away. The job market here, the economy here, the taxes here, our kids go to college somewhere and they decide that Western New York is not the place to be. We've got to try to change that, and hopefully that's what this show is all about, and that's what I know you and certainly I am all about. So
yeah, and Ralph, when you go to other states, like, for example, I spent time in Florida and now in Texas, everything is booming. I mean, you don't see an open field anymore without bulldozers and earth movers in it, building something, getting ready to build something. It's incredible. We just aren't used to seeing that in Western New York, and unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be seeing it anytime soon.
I have preached for years and years to people that come to interview with us for town-level government or the county-level government. The only way to keep taxes down is you have to increase tax base. And so to increase tax base means you have to bring, economy to the municipality. You have to bring, development to the municipality. And, our towns, hopefully, our Republican towns certainly try to get that. West Seneca has been so much better at that. Gary Dixon has done a great job at that. But we lack it, and you don't see the cranes that you see in other areas of the country.
No, and unfortunately, the National Democrat Party and our state Democrat leadership right now are involved in the war of envy. I mean, they just are declaring war on wealth creation, job creation, success, as if it's a bad thing. And that is not a winning formula. And the states that have rejected that mindset are the ones that you just described. They're booming. Lots of people, lots of income, lots of tax revenue, but low taxes and low regulation. But again, in New York State, led by the progressive left, it's just the opposite. Declare war on wealth, drive it out, and proclaim victory.
And we're going further to the left with Mondami in New York City making his demands, wanting to tax everybody. And then, we have Sean Ryan now in Buffalo. It seems to be a cancer that continues to spread. And, I know that the people that listen to this show are helpful to us. I know that they're believers. We've got to just keep on trying to move more and more people to the logic of what works and what doesn't.
I know it's a heavy lift, but there's no doubt that the progressive left is on the march in the Democrat Party. The thought leader is Bernie Sanders. He is developing a whole cadre of young progressive leftists. You mentioned Mondani, AOC, Katie Wilson, the new mayor of Seattle. There's a primary for the Democratic nomination for the U.S. Senate in Michigan. Right now, the lead is a guy named Abdul Salah, who is a far progressive leftist anti-Semite. If he gets elected, it's one more soldier in that Bernie Sanders movement.
Wow. So look, I want to touch all levels with you. So I want to touch the federal level, the state level, and the county level. So let's talk a little bit about the federal level at this point in time. The Iran war obviously is the big topic and what effect it will have on the midterms. So how do you see how Trump is handling that. What's the result of that? We need to get out of it, right?
Oh, yeah, no question. When this war first started, I was on another radio show, and I said to the host, I said, listen, if we're still talking about the war in October, and we're talking about gas prices where the price per gallon starts with a 4 or a 5, Republicans are going to take an absolute beating in the midterms. And so, yeah, we've got to get out of it, and we've got to get the price of gas down. Otherwise, it's going to be a really tough midterm. And midterms are tough anyways, Ralph, for parties that hold the White House. I mean, in the last 60 years, there's only been 2 times where the party in power in the White House has gained seats in a midterm.
Yeah.
That was 1998 and 2002. The average loss is 25, and if a president's popularity is under 50%, it can be 35. And so it really is a heavy lift. Now, what's different this time is the opposition, that being the Democrat Party, has never been lower in the opinion of the American people. In fact, I said the only polling entity more unpopular than Donald Trump is the Democrat Party brand itself. And I think what I'm reading is the Republicans are going to have a huge advantage in money. This latest wave of redistricting wars looks like it will net the Republicans at least 12 new congressional seats, as many as 19. We'll see where it all comes down. And Republicans have a huge advantage with money. What the Republican National Committee has raised and what Trump has.
That's certainly what I look at, that the Supreme Court decision that redistricting should do exactly what you just said. But if you look at the Buffalo News today, and I scan it,
I don't. That's right.
I get that. I scan through it because you need to know what the opposition is.
Yeah, me too.
And today they talk about, even though the Supreme Court decision gave Republicans the edge in certain states, they still have an article about Democrats still believe they will be in control and that they will gain the seats as opposed to the Republicans.
Well, yeah, because as I said, if let's say the Republicans max out and get 19 new seats, doesn't mean they're going to win every one of those seats.
Right.
There will be upsets. I mean, it comes down, as you know, Ralph, it comes down to issues, sometimes local issues, candidate quality, and so they may not win all 19. And as I say, the average number of seats lost by the party in power is 25. So the Democrats are saying, gee, even if we lose all of those new 19 districts, we still may pick up 25 for a net of 6, and they only need to win, I think, 4 to get control. So the math is in their favor, but, elections are funny things, as you know. Anything can happen between now and November. And as I say, the Democrat Party brand is really in the toilet, and I'm reading that that's going to be a major part of the Republican campaign, reminding people who they turned out of power and what those Democrats did when they were in power to everything, to inflation, which was 9%, to an open border, to crime, defund police, all of those things, transgender things with kids and boys and girls locker rooms, all of that stuff is going to be reminding voters just who the Democrats are and what they'll do if they get power again.
So, look, the other slanted article in the Buffalo News today is about how many people have left or are not going to have left Congress or are not going to run again. The largest they show in, I think, 30 years was what they said. They want to blame it on Trump. They want to blame it on frustration. Again, our people, the way I view it, and this isn't a criticism of our people, but our people want to go to work. They want to take care of their family. They want to do their job, and they want to pay their taxes and maintain their house. And politics is just something that, they think they can't help. They think that we're stuck with the situation we're in. We've got to get these people to vote, right? I mean, it's true that we have 3.5 million gun owners in New York State. If those gun owners voted, and if they voted their Second Amendment, there wouldn't be a Democrat anywhere. But we got to get them motivated.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, because elections are always about turnout. I mean, polls tell you, a snapshot of a moment in time, and assume that everybody who responds to the poll represents the general population, that everybody's going to vote. And we know that's just not the case. And so it becomes a matter of political messaging and political organization to get those people out. And one of the basic problems Republicans are facing this year is that Trump is not on the ballot, and we know that Trump brings out those those Trump voters who tend not to come out when he's not on the ballot. And so it's going to be incumbent on the Republican Party to really drive home the message to those once every 4-year Trump voters that you've got to come out, because if you don't and you turn the gavels over to the Democrats, they're going to impeach Trump. They're going to impeach and investigate all of his departments, his cabinet members. They're going to essentially bring government to a standstill over this Trump derangement syndrome, which, by the way, the Democrat senator from Pennsylvania, John Fetterman, this past week gave an interview where he said, his party is now becoming anti-American, anti-Semitic, and he said it's driven by Trump derangement syndrome. Those were his words. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah, that's what the Republicans have to do. They've got to get those Trump voters out in a midterm.
So I think that, Trump's obviously aware of it. The people that surround him are obviously aware of it. But knowing Trump, having been in his presence a number of times, meeting him in 2014, sitting across the desk from him, Trump is an extremely capable guy. He's, been capable all his life. Branding is what he's all about. So he's got to know that this is what's in front of us. And, I expect that he'll be campaigning everywhere. I expect that he realizes the war in Iran has to end. He realizes gas prices have to go down. That's why he wants to eliminate, or at least, pause the federal gas tax. That will be some help.
Temporarily, yeah, it'll be some help temporarily. But as I've said before, Ralph, what we're facing now is not an oil supply problem. The world is awash in oil. We've got a surplus of oil. There's 155 tankers in the Strait of Hormuz now. It's loaded with oil. This is a delivery problem, and we've got to solve that. We've got to get that oil delivered, and the price will come down because there's a surplus of oil. But the Iranians are banking on the fact that the midterms are coming, and that they can outlast Trump. That they're willing to absorb whatever pain they have to absorb, and figuring that Trump will not and the Americans will not, and they will prevail. So that's the test of nerves and the test of wills now that's going on, and we'll see what the next step is with Trump. Where does he go? I have always said that I think that you've got to shut off their economy completely, and to do that, you've got to take that Karg Island, which is responsible for all of their oil, just about all of it. They got to take that. They got to stop that island from producing any oil, and just starve these people of money, and then watch the system, the Islamic Republic, collapse under its own weight. And we know that the people of Iran are ready to rise up if given the opportunity. And as I said to people, Ralph, we don't know what the CIA and the Israeli Mossad has been doing to arm those people, because they don't have arms. They don't have a Second Amendment in Iran, okay?
Right.
And they're at a huge disadvantage if they rise up. But we don't know what has been done to arm them, so that if they rise up again and the government, the Republican Guard and the Bashis start shooting, people start shooting back. That changes the whole equation. So, again, that's one of those unknowns. We just have to wait and see what develops.
I have Iranian clients and two close friends that are Iranian, one of whom came into my office a week and a half ago to say, Trump has to do, he's got to end the regime in Iran. He's got an uncle who's in prison for political reasons simply because of his religion. So the people that are here that know the situation, they are on the side of Trump. They know how bad this regime is. Every president, the last several presidents, have certainly said how bad this regime is, how they have to be prevented from getting nuclear capabilities. Everybody has said it, and that includes certainly Democratic presidents, and yet we have the Democrats taking a different position today solely because it's Trump.
Right, and you're not going to change the regime with an air war campaign. It's not going to happen. It's got to happen on the ground with the people of Iran rising up and taking back their government. That is an absolute necessity if you're looking at regime change. But you're absolutely right. I've said this to Democrats. I've debated on this, that it's very interesting. When this war started, the two leading candidates at that time for the for the Democrat nomination for president were Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris. That, I think, has changed a little bit now. I think AOC has taken over the top spot. But nonetheless, at the time, those two were the leaders in the clubhouse. And both of them issued statements about the war, and both of them started their statements off with the same sentence, and that was very simple: Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon.
Right.
Now, they didn't go on in their statements to explain how they would prevent it. All they did was criticize Trump. But that's the starting point, and Trump keeps pounding on that. Marco Rubio, by the way, has done an excellent
Fantastic
job. Absolutely. I mean, his stock has risen, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
In Americans' opinions, incredibly. He's much more articulate than Trump in explaining things, much more thorough, and so he has explained why Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon as clearly as I've ever heard it. And Trump should feature him. He's featured him a lot. Every opportunity, he should be the feature.
I think he's 2028 for sure. We're here with Carl Calabrese, as I said at the beginning of this show, one of my favorite guests on this show because of his knowledge that spans all levels of government. So we were talking about the federal level. One last thing on the federal level, Carl, July 4th, 250 years celebration. Is there going to be a celebration if we're still involved in the war in Iran? Is Trump realized that we've got to get it over with that quickly?
Well, I think the answer to both questions is yes and yes. I think he realizes it's got to get over, and yes, there will be a celebration. There has to be a celebration. It's a milestone. I mean, this represents the longest-lasting republic in history. And republics usually ended after about 10 or 12 years in historical terms, and now we're celebrating 250 years of a republic. And that speaks to the brilliance of the founders and the structure of the Constitution, and we ought to celebrate that. And I think Trump's going to, because it's Trump. I mean, it's a forum for a big celebration, a big pro-American celebration, a big Trump celebration, and that's what we're going to see. But it's different than it was at the 100th or the 200th anniversary in 1976. I remember that because I was on a committee in the town of Tonawanda to organize all of the celebrations in the town, and they actually hired a consultant to come in and help us organize the celebration. And we met all year. We started meeting in January of that year to get ready for the summer, for the July 4th date. I'm not seeing quite that level of grassroots organization this time, but I think Trump will certainly put on an extravaganza in D.C.
Well, he's the master of this. He's shown this in so many different ways in the past. Not only his branding, the Miss America contest. I mean, he's just shown how he's capable of doing this. But that I believe the war in Iran has to come, to some kind of conclusion for the country to get the most punch out of that July 4th celebration.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It'll be a weight around the ankle of the celebration if we're still in a shooting war in Iran. And,
yeah,
I think Trump knows that. But the problem is, what defines victory?
Well, as you said before, he's got to cripple them to some degree to get an uprising.
And he's got to open the strait.
Yeah, he certainly better do that.
He's got to prevent them from laying mines and shooting off anti-ship missiles. Even if they, the problem is they may not have a lot of either of those weapons, but they don't need a lot. It's like I said, it's like a shark attack. You get one shark attack on a beach in Florida, and nobody goes in the water up and down the coast anymore. Okay?
Right.
And it's the same thing here. You fire one anti-ship missile at a tanker, and everybody goes into a crouch, a defensive crouch.
Well, let's shift over to the state. So now we're talking about Kathy Hochul, $260 billion proposal. We're now at $267 billion and still not there. What is going on?
That's a great question, Ralph, because I don't know if she knows what's going on. It was just, a week, 10 days ago, where she went public with a press conference and said, we have a deal.
Yeah,
we've got a budget.
Right.
And immediately the Speaker of the Assembly and the Leader of the Senate said, no, we don't. What is she talking about? That was bizarre. I don't think I've ever witnessed anything quite like that before. I can't imagine what she was thinking.
It's amazing that she would go out and do it. Again, like you, I've known Kathy for decades, 35 years. and I've had lunch with her a number of times. I mean, the woman is not deep. She's simply political. She simply does what she thinks is the political move. So she must have thought, she could go out there and say, look, we've got a deal without really locking it down, without really understanding the dynamics of, how foolish can that be?
You and I both know that in every case I can remember, when a deal is announced, it includes the three leaders, the
right,
governor,
all three of them,
speaker, and the Senate leader. Yes, all three are standing there, and they announce the deal. And for her to be there alone, right away, it jumped out at me. So what is she talking about? Where are the other two legislative leaders? There's no deal here. It turned out that was not the case. And come on, she knows that. So I have a tough time figuring Kathy Hochul out.
I don't have a tough time figuring it. She's not a deep person. She's,
No, she's not. And Ralph, remember, we're both old enough to remember a book called The Peter Principle?
Yes, absolutely.
Right, which said that people always reach their level of incompetency.
Yeah.
That somebody could be a really great, I'll give you an example. Somebody could be a really great assistant coach in football, offense coordinator, defense coordinator, just super. They get appointed, they become the head coach, and they fail miserably, and then they go back to their old job and succeed again. That's the Peter Principle, that you reach your level of incompetency, and I think it's at play here in the governor's meeting.
Well, again, she couldn't handle the clerk's job. She had all those boxes of checks. I mean,
right.
I don't know that she had a level of competency. I think she certainly was a great retail politician. She still is.
Absolutely correct. But the retail politician skills don't play as well at the gubernatorial level.
Right.
Okay? Because now you're communicating with press releases and press conferences and big picture stuff. You're not in a room of seniors shaking hands and charming everybody, which she is a master of.
She's great at that.
She's kind of lost that. But, just...
I've seen her in.
Lucky. Let's put it that way.
I've seen her in diners go up to every single person in the diner and have some patter for every single person. But you're right. That doesn't work at this level.
No. I've said it many times. As a retail politician, I can't think of anybody better than Kathy Hochul. There may be some just as good, but none better. She was excellent at that, which played out in the town board level, which played at the county clerk level, and even played at the congressional level, but not at governor.
So... where are we with the budget? We're still on extensions. I mean, they still, are not there. I got to believe that there's animosity with the leaders, given what Kathy has done.
That, and she's taken on some really big issues with really big and powerful constituencies. She wants to deal with auto insurance, and that gets the trial lawyers involved. And she wants to change the crime laws, and that gets the all of those groups involved. And so and the legislature responds to that. I mean, that's the choke point for legislators. They go home and they have their town hall meetings. They're still at that grassroots level, and all of those interest groups show up and beat them up. So they bring that back to Albany, and that's what produces the snail's pace of negotiations. How do you resolve what the governor wants with what the pressures that the legislators are feeling?
The budget has gone up, 25% over the last 5 years? I mean, the budget is twice the budget of Florida, which has more people. How crazy can it get, Carl?
It's always been that way, Ralph. Everything New York does, whether it's running prisons, running the Medicaid program, running education, everything costs more than comparable states in terms of services, but less population. We spend twice as much against states that have more population than us. It's just the nature of the bureaucracy, and we're starting to see that come to the forefront now with these disclosures of all this Medicare fraud going on, being discovered in Minnesota, Ohio, Florida, California, hospice fraud and daycare frauds. And, I just see the other day a guy in Florida is accused of defrauding the federal government out of $1 billion with a B, $1 billion in Medicare fraud. This is going on all over the country at the federal level, and I got to believe it's also going on at the state level with state programs, because we're such a big state with such big bureaucracy. And when you combine those things together with little oversight, you're going to get people taking advantage of it and ripping it off. And I if we ever got into fraud in New York State-run programs like we are beginning to get into the fraud of federal programs, I think people would be really set back and amazed and mad,
well,
justifiably so.
We need a controller that's, looking out after the public, and that certainly isn't what we have today. Hopefully Joe Hernandez, who's got an excellent background and, is the right person. Hopefully he's capable of winning this race. I'm certainly there to do everything I can to support him.
And he's got an issue now. He might be, if I was advising that campaign, I would say, start talking about that. If you're elected, you are going to lead the same kind of anti-fraud efforts we're seeing being applied to federal programs. You're going to do that to state programs.
Exactly.
That could be a good issue.
Yeah, that is a great issue not only for him but for Saritha in the Attorney General's office. But the Comptroller's office is in charge of the money, and there's so much they have the right of audit. She's trying to take that away. She's trying to reduce the ability for the controller to be involved. I think she wanted to reduce the number from $50,000 to $500,000, or she certainly was looking to take away the power of the controller's office.
That would be an interesting campaign, something different, which I believe if you're going to have any chance of winning in New York, you can't run by the conventional playbook. It'd be interesting if they campaigned as a team. The controller saying, "I'll find the fraud," and the AG saying, "And I'll prosecute it."
That's right. That's right. But it's always the head of the ticket. So we've got Bruce Blakeman at the head of the ticket, and Bruce is articulate. He's capable. He's done a great job in Nassau, but I need him to move around more.
Yeah, and he needs money to make himself more well-known on the macro level. I mean, he should move around more and take as much free media as he can get, and it's available to him. But again, in the last Siena poll, Ralph, that I looked at, 64% of New Yorkers don't know who he is.
Don't know, right.
Don't know. So that's a matter of using, mass communications, radio, television, and trying to make yourself a household name in a short period of time. It can be done if you have the money.
So I think that's the problem. I mean, every time I've talked to him about being on this show, he wants to be on. He's willing to, talk to our audience and have a presence through that. But, Lee Zeldin was here over and over and over again. Lee Zeldin was everywhere. Bruce, I think he's hurt by the financial aspect of it. I think Elise drew a lot of money out of the donors that would donate on our side for the governor. I think he's hurt by that. I know he's trying. I know he's out there trying to get things accomplished, but, we need more.
Yeah, and the other thing he's facing off, it's very difficult to raise money in New York against an incumbent governor.
Yeah. Because
the business people know that the governor has an awful lot of power to reward friends and punish enemies. And, you put your name on a campaign disclosure report giving big money to Blakeman, and the governor's office is going to have that the same day, and you get put on that, revenge is a meal best eaten cold list. And so that's part of the problem. If you're going to raise money in this state, or if you're going to raise money to run in this state against an incumbent governor, you're probably going to have to do it with a lot of money from outside the state, from people who aren't doing business with state government.
Well, here again, that is so true. But here again, individuals, we need the individual electorate, even if you can only afford $25, if you can afford $100. I mean, right. That would, if we can get our population to donate, and it's easy. You go to Bruce Blakeman's website, you can donate easily. You don't have to be a huge donor, although certainly we need those, but you don't have to be a huge donor. Again, I get back to the 3.5 million gun owners.
Right.
Again, if we could get $100 or $25 from those people.
$25, yeah.
And we've got to encourage that. It's got to be part of the plan for Bruce.
Yeah, $25 a person. The gun owners get you almost $1 million.
Right.
I did the quick math in my head. Almost $1 million. And they got to get registered to vote, because I've seen statistics about gun owners and the percentage who aren't even, forget they're not voting. They're not voting because they're not even registered. It baffles me. What are you people thinking?
One of the ideas I had was that there should be someone in the campaign whose entire job is to go from one gun club to another throughout this entire state and get people registered and get people motivated to vote. So Bobby Ann Cox is the person that I've always thought was capable of doing that. She's traveled this state. She's a lawyer. She's got great communication skills. I had talked to Bobby Ann about doing this when Elise was going to be hopefully our nominee. But I think, and I'm going to have another conversation with Bruce about Bobby Ann Cox and about that particular role because she was willing to do it. I think she's capable of doing it. I think it's an element of this campaign that's necessary to get all of the gun clubs behind Bruce, behind our Republican candidates. What do you think? That's my idea to try to get it done.
The old saying, there's gold in our hills. I belong to the Tonawanda Sportsman's Club. I got almost 1,000 members. I wonder how many of those are not registered.
Right.
But they're all gun owners, and they all say they support the Second Amendment. I know they do. Now, the question is put that into action. Register and then vote, and vote for people who are going to support the Second Amendment. But you got to go. You got to do the outreach.
Yep.
Ralph.
Carl, I'm so glad to have you on. In terms of the elections this year, we have, for example, Pat Jasinski, who's our assemblyman here in Cheektowaga. He was one of only two 2 years ago who was able to take away a seat from a seated Democrat. Where do you think we are? This year it's going to, Pat, we need to bring Pat back to the assembly. We need to make some more gains. Gary Dixon is taking on Pat Burke. That race, I think, is absolutely doable. Pat Burke was in the Buffalo News as announcing for county executive next year. What does he want to be? Does he want to be the assemblyman or does he want to be county executive?
Yeah, I think that's a very winnable race. And Pat in Cheektowaga beat a long-term incumbent that no one thought he could do.
Right.
But yet he pulled it off with a good campaign. So, yeah, I think Gary Dixon could certainly pull that one off. And I don't know what's going on in the rest of the state, but it's just, if you look at the numbers, Ralph, I mean, the re-election rate for incumbents in New York State Assembly and Senate, it rivals the old Politburo, the Soviet Union, in terms of bringing back the same people on the podium year after year after year. It's very difficult.
It's all about redistricting.
It's a little easier now.
It's
redistrict and money, and now you've got
for sure
public financing. Yeah.
But the numbers speak for themselves. Pat, if you have the right candidate, so Pat Jasinski, I've gotten to know him, and he's just an amazing individual. Law enforcement for decades, a community-minded person, a beautiful family, a beautiful wife, beautiful daughters, out there in the community doing public service. He was exactly the right candidate. And he took on a difficult race, a difficult incumbent who had been there, I think, 8 or 10 years. She was there.
10 years. Monica Wallace.
And
I think what he did, and what I think you have to do if you're going to beat these incumbents, especially outside of New York City, upstate, he showed that Monica Wallace had become too liberal for her district. That she had sided with the Albany leadership, which is primarily a New York City-based, very far-left progressive leadership on a lot of things. And I think any Republican running against an incumbent senator or assembly person has got to do the same thing. They've got to find those key issues that show that the person has gotten out of touch with the values of the district by virtue of the fact that they've chosen the leadership position over their district position. And I think that's your best ticket for beating incumbents in the state, because we know that the upstate Democrats, they talk a conservative game at election time, but if you look at their voting records, they are pretty much down the line with the very liberal progressive leadership of Albany. Once in a while, the leadership lets a person who might be in a little more difficult position off the hook, so to speak, to vote their conscience and vote their district as opposed to the leadership position. But that's only because they have a supermajority and they can afford to do that. But in many of these high emotional issues, these hot point issues, our people in upstate go along with the downstate folks, and that's what Pat did with Marco Wallace. He just showed the people of Cheektowaga that she's just out of touch. She doesn't vote the way you would vote if you were sitting in Albany.
This is a woman, Monica Wallace, who co-sponsored late-term abortion. She co-sponsored it. And that's certainly not what the residents of Cheektowaga, Lancaster, that's certainly not what they expect out of their assembly person. Not only did she co-sponsor it, she helped celebrate, the fact that it got passed. Late-term abortion, that you could abort right up until birth.
Which, by the way, is unpopular everywhere, okay? Not just Cheektowaga. I mean, that's a losing position with most people in most parts of the state, other than maybe the city of New York itself.
So, look, Pat is an excellent candidate. I'm doing, in everything that we possibly can do from the Conservative Party to assist him. It is going to be a difficult race just based on numbers, but he is an excellent, excellent candidate. We need to raise money for him. We need to keep him there for sure. And then we flip to Gary Dixon, again, who's got a similar background. Gary was FBI for his career, rose in the ranks in the FBI, was actually in charge in a Russian post for the FBI, then went to work for banks, got a lot of knowledge and, experience there. Has run the town of West Seneca. I mean, changed the town of West Seneca from 50 years of Democratic rule to now flipped to, every board member sits there with the Republican conservative endorsement. So Gary's got that same kind of stellar background. He's out every day. I know he's out pounding the doors. Pat Burke, to me, has always been the outsider of the Democrats. He ran his first race against the Democratic Party. I don't know that he's got many friends, but they'll want to keep the seat.
Oh, sure. And again, if I'm advising Gary Dixon's campaign, I would do the same thing as Pat's campaign. I would go through Burke's voting record with a fine-tooth comb.
Yes. And
find those issues that really put him out of sync with his district, and just pound those home. And I got to believe you'll be able to find 2 or 3 of those highly emotional issues that will show very clearly that he votes the way they want him to vote in downstate.
He votes the ultra-liberal. That's right.
Race. Yeah, that makes it a winnable race.
So what do you think about, in the Buffalo News, maybe it was a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, there was pictures, and there was 3 people running, potentially running for county executive, and he certainly was one of them. That's got to hurt him in that race, right?
Yeah, I would think. I would certainly exploit that. I don't think it's going to be the
deciding factor, but it's
certainly being the deciding factor. But it's one of those little burrs under the saddle that you can keep having seated on. That what does this guy want to do? I mean, how committed is he to this district and representing us in Albany when he's got his eyes on County Hall? By the way, I don't think he's going to emerge as the Democrat candidate for county executive. If I had to handicap it today, I would put my money on Lisa Shamara. She seems to have the inside track with polling cars and with the Democrat Party. So,
but it wouldn't surprise me that Pat Burke would run a primary.
He might very well do that because, as you know, anything can happen in a primary. That's all about voter turnout.
Yep. So we've got to maintain, as I said, Pat's seat. We've got to pick up Gary's seat. Whether or not we can pick up other seats, the numbers are against us. We've got to get our people out. It's always the same thing. It's the get out the vote that's going to make a huge amount of difference. I'm always proud of the fact that we have roughly 15,400 conservatives throughout Erie County, and yet we put 33,000 votes on the line for Lee Zeldin. We're capable of being able to accomplish that, but, the Democrats, Republicans, they're lucky to get 40% of their electorate out.
Right, and the advantage now that the Conservative Party, I think, has is that, as we've talked about this many times, the Conservative Party line gives a landing zone for Democrats that are not happy with their
Yes.
Democrat candidate,
Yes.
but they can't bring themselves for historical, cultural reasons to vote for a Republican. They can do it on the conservative line. Well, I think as the Democrat Party moves farther and farther to the left and alienates more and more of its traditional religious, blue-collar, ethnic vote, those folks are going to find their way to your line, and you're going to see even bigger numbers going forward.
So the way Erie County really lays out when you look at the number of votes, and I've mentioned this a number of times, so Democrats have roughly 297,000 voters, but that's out of 630,000 voters in Erie County. So they only have 297. Unfortunately, the Republicans are somewhere around 160,000, but the blanks, the independents, are over 170,000. So it's a question of getting those blanks to vote and to vote on the Republican side. Now, I've been a believer that people who don't register or register as independents or blanks are people who oppose the party in power but don't want to be public about it. Do you think they lean more toward our side than the other side?
Yeah, I think you're on a track there. I think there's another part of it, though, that it's one of my pet peeves. And I've said this to Republican county chairman in numerous counties. I said, ever since I first got involved in politics, every single year when the Board of Elections publishes its voter enrollment numbers, Republicans have been losing ground. When I first started, Republicans were down 30,000. Now we're down, 130,000, 135,000. Every single year, and I've yet to see anybody, any chairman, any leader in the Republican Party in any given year say, wait a minute, we've got to stop this hemorrhaging. We've got to do something. And I've said, if you take a look at 3 states that have had very successful turnarounds in terms of enrollment, that being Pennsylvania, Florida, and California. Believe it or not, California. Florida flipped. They went from being down a couple 300,000 voters to up 1 million now. Pennsylvania has gone from being like 3 million down, Republican to Democrat, to drawing even. And even California in the last couple of years have registered over 700,000 new Republicans. And I said to county leaders, I said, why don't you put together a study committee and reach out to the people in those 3 states that were involved in those efforts and find out how they did it, and then bring that home and see what would work in Erie County and implement those same programs, because they've worked in other states that were heavily Democrat. And they could work here, but you got to do it. You got to have the effort instead of just sitting back every year looking at the numbers and bemoaning the fact that you're losing ground. It's a losing formula. It's unsustainable. And so, in addition to getting those independents to vote for your candidate, I think you got to have a full court press on getting people registered in the Republican Party. And again, with the Democrat Party brand being in the toilet now, it's just an opportune time to start doing that.
So, again, to me, that involves getting people who are willing to go into our colleges, talk to people at our colleges, willing to go into our high schools, and, have a conversation with our students.
Gun clubs you mentioned, all those places.
Pardon me, Carl?
I said the gun clubs.
Yeah, the gun
clubs,
clubs.
conservation clubs, and there's all of these groups that you could be talking to and getting people registered to vote, and maybe changing parties.
Well, again, that's why I think there needs to be, like Bobby Ann Cox, there need to be a dedicated person, part of every county party, a dedicated person whose job it is to go register people, to go get these people involved. And certainly, to me, the gun clubs are number one, because you know where they stand. They're Second Amendment people.
Right.
That is their issue, and that's our issue. They'll stand with us. But I do think we need to go to the colleges like Charlie Kirk was willing to do. I do think we need to have someone who has the ability to debate people and have students. I do think we need to show that there's nothing wrong with being a conservative. It's the right place to be. It's where your morals are. It's where your religion is. It's where your parents really are in terms of hard work, ethnic, stability. I think they need to be convinced that there's nothing wrong with it.
Well, they're out there. And let me give you a real life example. As you know, I was an adjunct professor at the University of Buffalo for 17 years. I taught a course called Local Government Policy and Politics. I'd have 25, 30 students every fall semester. And I would always start off introducing myself and telling them my political background and telling them my political biases. I'm a Republican. I'm a conservative.
Right.
And you don't have to agree with me, but I'm telling you right now, you're going to get a different view of government than probably you've ever gotten before on this university campus. Again, you don't have to agree with it, but it's a different view. And I always start every course up that way. And invariably, at the end of the first class, I should say, I would get one or two students come up to me, literally looking over their shoulder, okay?
Yeah.
And whisper,
yeah,
Professor Calabrese, I'm a conservative too, or I'm a Republican too. And then they would look over their shoulder real quick and dart out for fear of what might happen to them if anybody overheard that little conversation. But they're out there. They're just intimidated because of the nature of those university campuses. But as Charlie Kirk proved, may he rest in peace, if you go into those campuses and you confront those ideas with better ideas, you can sway people.
But look, Carl, I love having you on this show. Hopefully you're willing to come on more because this was a great conversation. I really appreciate it. Go back to those grandkids and enjoy.